Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back. Hope everyone is off to a good start in 2019. And thank you for joining us again for another civil learning session. As Katana mentioned, my name is Matt Miyamoto, and I will be hosting today's session on Infraworks. And leading in from the previous session that we had back in December, I'm going to focus on Infraworks Collaboration, meaning using Infraworks to combine data sources from multiple products or multiple file formats to create a composite 3D model of a project. And I will also, for the sake of continuation purposes, be using the same project that I had mentioned in our previous WebEx on the athletic complex. So if you had not joined us back in December, I do have a few review slides that I'll go over to just kind of reintroduce the topic and reintroduce the project, but I will continue on with our theme of collaboration and focus this time on Autodesk Infraworks, which is part of the AEC collection. And again, thank you for taking time out of your days to join us today. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the U.S. or anywhere in the world. For those of you who do not know anything about me, my name is Matt, and I am the E&I or ISD team manager here at ImagineIt, covering the western region of the U.S. and Canada. My background is in engineering. I'm a licensed civil engineer and was part of a private civil engineering firm before joining Ideate back in 2008. In early 2018, Ideate was acquired by ImagineIt, and we are now part of the same company focusing on Autodesk products and providing sales and services and consulting and training to our customers. Previously, before I was the team manager, I was also a technical specialist and an instructor, so I still am Autodesk certified, and I'm a certified professional user as well for AutoCAD and Civil 3D and Infraworks. So that's a little bit of background on who I am here at ImagineIt. All right, so just to give a brief introduction on the product again, I will be focusing today's web session on Infraworks. And the current version as of yesterday, when I checked my install, was Infraworks 2019.2. If you go to the About screen, you would see the version as 2019.2.17.0. And I wanted to bring that up because Infraworks, unlike the general products in the Autodesk collection, is not on an annual rollout basis. It is a product that is updated throughout the year. So depending on when you last checked and when you last updated, you may be seeing the same features or you may be seeing different features. And if you do not see some of the features and tools that we mention or that we bring up or that you've been hearing about in your installation, it's a good idea to go ahead and check for an update or check for a more recent release that is available. Now, in the background of how Infraworks works, Infraworks is an entitlement-based subscription product rather than a serial number-based subscription product. So unlike Civil 3D or AutoCAD or Revit, where you have to install and use a registry key and a serial number to activate the license, in the case of Infraworks, your software manager would need to assign your Autodesk account to an Infraworks entitlement. And what that will do is it will allow your Autodesk login to access all of the features and functions of the full product when you are signed in. That does also mean that there is no serial number to add, but you do need to log in whenever you launch the program. If it's your system, when you log in, it'll remember that you're logged in. The next time you launch, it will not prompt you to do it again. It's only going to ask you to sign in if you choose to sign out at the end of your session. It also means that anyone can install Infraworks. So anybody can install Infraworks. You can have it installed on as many systems as you want. However, only the folks who have the entitlement will be able to log in and access all of the features. If you attempt to log in with a non-entitled account, so let's say you have a generic email account that you created an Autodesk account with that isn't associated to any licenses or subscriptions. If you tried to sign in with that, you would see some basic functions there available to you. If anyone had shared a model with you that you downloaded, or if you had saved it to a disk or your local drive, you would be able to open that model and view it, but that's about it. You wouldn't have access to all of the features for adding more information or creating data or sharing data or hosting data of that nature. So you do have some limited functionality with a non-entitled account, but for the full functionality, you would need to have that listed under your Autodesk account as an entitlement. It also means that you can sign in on any computer. That's the other benefit to this, where although I have a lot of models saved locally to my drive, if I do choose to save it to the network or save it to a cloud location, I could sign in on another system anywhere else, and as soon as I log in, it will tie it into my A360 account and would give me access to anything that I have hosted non-locally. So if I do have web-based files that I've got access to, I can sign in at a customer site or on another laptop or another desktop if I needed to, and I would be able to access those models. Also, a good idea that we've had back in the day was to create backup copies on like a portable drive and just bring that around with you. That saves space. Infraworks models do tend to be rather large in size, especially if you're covering a large area. And having that on a local drive is just kind of taking up space on your system. So if you have a backup or an external drive, that's also a good idea for hosting some of your data and some of your models. So in that sense also, the models can be hosted in the cloud or locally, but there is one catch to that. It is now linked to BIM 360 document management. So Infraworks does have a BIM 360 document management tie-in for model creation, and that's linked to the model builder. However, once you are assigned to a BIM 360 project, regardless of if it is for Infraworks or not, once Autodesk knows that you are tied to BIM 360, your model builder will default to BIM 360. So there's no option to go back to a local model copy once you're tied to a BIM 360 account. The only way that I was able to get around that was to essentially remove myself from the BIM 360 projects that I had been added to, and then I was able to do a local copy again. You can start with BIM 360 and then download that to create a local copy or create a copy of the model locally once it's there, but the default for model builder is going to be that BIM 360 project once you are assigned. And you'll see that coming up when I get into the live demonstration as well. So that was some background on Infraworks. In regards to the updates, because it is not an annual release, Infraworks updates are released periodically throughout the year. So that's always a good idea to check on available versions, available features and functions, and always read the README files. They're called README files because you're supposed to read them, although hardly anyone ever does. But that usually tells you what's available to you in that release. And then you can also use that as a gauge of whether you want to install it at the time or if you want to wait till there's something else that you are looking forward to trying out before you install the next version. Only one version is available at a time, so you're not allowed to have multiple versions of Infraworks on your system at the same time. There is a way to do it if you change some settings in the registry key, but because that's registry key based, I'm not going to mention more than that. And I don't recommend it, or I officially am going to say I don't recommend it, but there are some resources perhaps out there on the internet that may allow you to do so. So that being said, whenever you do install an update, if you have previous models from previous versions, when you open those models in an updated version of Infraworks, it will also upgrade the model. So you will see a bunch of messages and warnings saying that your model was created in an earlier release and it will be updated to the most current version at that time. So be aware of that. Anytime you do install an update, you are essentially then going to be required to upgrade any of the existing models that you have. So updates are periodic, but they do require to update the models as well. So getting into the purpose behind today's webinar, we're now looking at why we're using Infraworks, and not just Infraworks in general, but Infraworks for collaboration. So when we talk about Infraworks for collaboration, we're trying to leverage the functionality that is included inside of Infraworks that allows us to take data from multiple sources and compile them all into a composite model to give a better representation of the entire project or the whole of the project idea and the concept rather than just a single piece or one or two pieces where we had Civil 3D for civil designs, we had Revit for architectural or mechanical or structural designs, and you could get Civil 3D surface into Revit, you could get Revit site into Civil 3D, and that's kind of where we stopped. We were just kind of trading data in that sense, but we weren't really able to get everything together and see what it looks like and see how it might function in the context of its surroundings. And that's what we can leverage Infraworks for. So in this case, we are trying to do more than just infrastructure, and that's kind of the idea that we're going for here in regards to collaboration as well. So we're not just thinking about Infraworks as it was formerly known as Autodesk Infrastructure Modeler. We don't want to get stuck in the box of infrastructure. We want to be able to think of Infraworks like a software that can understand multiple different fields and multiple different uses and be applied to all sorts of different things. So it can do more than just infrastructure. And the focus here is going to be 3D modeling and visualization. Not necessarily high-end 3D modeling and visualization like you would get out of 3ds Max or something like that, but very, very nice 3D modeling visualization of conceptual designs. It does create everything in real-world locations, so it is tied to a geographic location on the globe. It allows you to place things where they actually fall relative to the surrounding terrain, buildings, roads, utilities, everything that it can find. It will allow you to compile those data sources into one model so that you can see more than just what you are creating. You can see how what you're creating fits into the environment. And collaboration here is also the key. So by compiling all of those different data sources, we do get to see the full picture of what we're trying to do rather than just piece by piece or trying to, in our heads, imagine how the pieces fit together. And one of the messages that we had from our previous WebEx was that we are trying to see how everything works together as much as how just our piece functions. So it's not just our responsibility or our discipline that we're focusing on. We're trying to make sure that everything else is in sequence and is in sync with everything for functionality's sake. Storyboards and fly-throughs, that's also going to help us out with communicating our designs and communicating our intent, and that is a very, very nice feature of Infraworks as well that is not always focused on, but is there for use. So communication through collaboration, that's our first message. And how is our software going to help us get this across? So how do we communicate through collaboration and collaborative design? This is something that is a review from our previous session as well. So our composite model, or the reason why we're now looking at models as opposed to two-dimensional designs or two-dimensional plan sets, is to communicate that message. What's our intent? What do we need? What is going to make this work? These are all questions. These are all targets of why we create our designs and why we do the things that we do as engineers and architects and designers. So why or what are we trying to accomplish? And that's one of the big things. When we place something in a file in Civil 3D, I can create a terrain surface, I can make a pond, and I can look at it and say, you know, my pond is going to collect all of my runoff. But until I see what's around the site and what's around the project site, how do I know if the pond's the right size or the right shape or fitting in the right spot? If I design a pond on my project site and there just happens to be an elementary school or a school across the street, is that going to be safe for the environment, safe for the surroundings? That's something that we always want to consider when we're doing these things. So what are we trying to accomplish, but also how do we get that done, and whether the design that we're presenting gets that done in the most effective way or not. The BIM modeling process is what the industry has gone through and is now what the industry is relying on to help us answer the questions more efficiently. It's not just plans, it's not just pieces of paper or printouts of plan sets that we deliver over to the contractor and wait until they go out and decide how they're going to build it to find out if there are issues. We're creating these virtual models and BIM models so that we can try to preemptively find all of these issues or any issues that might come up so that we can resolve them before it causes a delay in construction, before it causes a change order, to our designs and before it causes increase or overruns in cost. And Infraworks is now also one of those tools that we're introducing as an option to use for how we can get this done. So in order to use Infraworks, in order to give you an example of how this might fall into the scope of a project, we are going to look back at the project that I had mentioned in December's session as well. This was an athletic complex in the state of Hawaii that was proposed a few years back. Last time I was there, it had not been built, so unfortunately I think this either got delayed or it got put on hold for a while. But what we have here on this slide is a newspaper article. So that picture that you see in the upper left corner was a screenshot from a newspaper article that was posted to the public proposing this big 78-acre athletic complex with baseball fields and football fields and soccer fields and a playground and a park and all kinds of walking areas and bike areas and things. This was replacing what was formerly agricultural land. So it was all sugarcane fields back in the day when I grew up in this area. Now it is no longer in use because the sugarcane industry has ended, so they've got a whole lot of open land, and it happens to be flat land, which is perfect for athletic complexes and things like this where you have lots of fields that need large areas that are unobstructed and relatively flat in order to function. So the newspaper article had the picture in there, and then a few months later, I think it was, there was a YouTube video that was generated by I think it was the Planning Commission or one of the public agencies involved with the project. And they created this 3D model that you see in the bottom corner. It was kind of a 3D visual of what they had in mind, but it was limited to just, again, the area that was covering the project site. So they didn't really show a whole lot of what was around it beyond that. But very nice and very detailed. You see a lot of structures, you see a lot of landscaping, a lot of trees and walkways and bike paths and things. So you get a good picture of how this would fill the project site, but not necessarily how this is going to fit into what's around it or fit into the environment. What are you going to see when you're on this field? How are you going to get there with the roads? What kind of roads or what kind of traffic is leading into and out of this site? Where is it in context of the town itself? That's all information that is very, very useful, but unless you are very familiar with the location, if you're a resident of the area, you might know what's there, you might realize what these items are. But if you've never seen it, if you're not quite familiar with the area, then you may not have a lot of knowledge. For example, I know that there's a cow pasture on the south side of the road, or the bottom side of the road there. It used to be an old dairy farm, and that's across the street from where everybody's going to be hanging out and playing sports. So that's something that you kind of need to be aware of, and unless you know it beforehand, you're not really able to see that or understand that just from the pictures. So we can use a tool like Infraworks to give us a better idea of what else is involved with this. So this model is now the second step in the generation of BIM modeling. It's the evolution from plans to models, but we can go even further. So we want to take this one step further. So what is this project going to look like, or what would this project look like if we attempted it inside of Infraworks? And when we're looking at it in that sense, I'll start from scratch. I've done quite a bit of pre-preparation just to cut back on the processing time that you have for data source configuration and all that. So I've gone ahead and done a few stages of this, but I will walk you through the process along the way and try and get from A to, I would say I'm about at E or F in the stage of A to Z when we get to the actual demonstration. So what does it look like? Whenever we start with Infraworks, and if you've done it before, then you're probably already familiar with this. If you are new to Infraworks, or if you're just thinking about getting started with Infraworks and you have an AEC collection, so you already have access to this, this is kind of a general workflow that you can follow. And this is something that I try to do for any project that I'm handed or any project that I'm asked to assess or review. I always try and make some type of model just to get an idea of what is there on site. And in that case, all of our projects start from the ground up, and in the Infraworks case, we create the ground using a tool called the Model Builder. So we start with the Model Builder. This is something that you're going to have access to directly from the launch page of Infraworks, and I would say every project that I do, I will create some type of model for Model Builder. Whether I end up using it for more than just seeing what's there or not, it depends on the project, but I always try and see what is available to me, what can I find just from the sources that are readily available. And this is a tool that looks for available GIS data, so it's building it in real-world context from GIS information, road center lines, building footprints, ground imagery, terrain elevations. All of those bits of data will come in and be compiled automatically for you by the Model Builder, so that you end up with a model of the existing conditions to start out with. And there's nothing more complicated than searching for it like you would search for it on Bing Maps. And I mentioned Bing Maps because it is tied to the Bing Map service for aerial imagery as well. So when we start out with Infraworks, we're going to do a Model Builder search. This is the Infraworks landing page, so this is what you would see when you start the application. The first thing that you'll notice is that I have a library here of my existing projects that I've created. Some of these are local projects and some of these are cloud-based. You can see where they are hosted by the icons that appear on the bottoms there. I do have a couple of different accounts, which is why this one is relatively short in terms of a list of my existing models. But if you have other models that are not recently used, you can also open them, and you would see a list of additional SQLite database files that are all used to contain Infraworks information. So you can open existing models, you can create new models from scratch if you just have a generic project you would like to create, or in my recommendation there from the previous slide in the PowerPoint, we're going to start with the Model Builder. Once you click on Model Builder, your first step is always going to be searching for a location. So in this case, if I search for a certain place or a certain area in the world, it is worldwide now. If I type in Waimea, there are a few different Waimeas around the world here. There's a Waimea Street in Texas, actually, and a few different Waimeas in the state of Hawaii as well. Waimea Canyon is the one on the island of Kauai. That's in the middle of the island there. And it happens to be up a long winding road from the project site that I had mentioned. So if I search for that Waimea Canyon location, it takes me to the island there, and then I know that my project site happens to be right here along the highway on the main town area, or just to the left, I should say, or west of the Waimea town. So by finding my area here within the map, I can choose to download the entire view, or if I just want a smaller area, I can draw a rectangle around it. And in this case, I'm trying to get a rectangle that is covering my project plus enough that I can see what's around it. So I would create something that's, a little bit larger than my project site. In a lot of cases, I would want to make sure I get enough detail to see if there are any impacts to drainage, any impacts to traffic flow in and out, something like that. So I would try and draw a box big enough to see enough of the surroundings that I could find out any type of external contributing factors that might impact my design. You are allowed to download an area up to 200 square kilometers. In this case, my project, which covers about 78 acres, this is about a mile's worth of the highway, maybe a mile and a half of the highway. And the box here that I'm drawing is only 25 square kilometers, so I can go up to 8 times the size in actuality. And I do have, I actually did download the entire island once. So I have a model, another model of the entire island, which is way bigger than 200 square kilometers, but I did this long ago when you could still download a whole bunch of stuff. So I downloaded the whole island. I do have it there. It's very big. It's not a super nice functioning project, so I wouldn't recommend downloading an area that large, but 200 square kilometers, just keep it at that. And we can see that it is looking for roads, buildings, imagery, and terrain elevation data. So once you designate your area of interest, you would then enter a name and then select a folder for where that model is going to be saved or downloaded to. In this case, I am linked to a BIM 360 project. This is a project that we have hosted here internally. So I am automatically now defaulting to a BIM 360 folder. There's no option for me to choose a local drive like my C drive or if I had an external drive. At this point, because of BIM 360, it's asking me to select one of these folders. And because of that, I have a designated folder here inside of my BIM 360 project that I've created just for Infraworks, just for the model builder. So I have just a folder in there that I know that's the one that I'm going to use. So that is what I would choose to do, and then create the model. So once you create the model, it's going to allow you to basically exit out of that model builder function, and it'll go through and search on its own. So Infraworks does this all behind the scenes, and you'll receive an email from Autodesk saying that your model is now ready to download. When it's ready to download, you'll also see a tile pop up here on your home screen, and at that point, all you have to do is click on it to access it. In this case, I had already downloaded the model, and I've already gone ahead and prepped a few things. So when I click on it, it pops up instantaneously. If this is the first time I had accessed the model, you would have to wait for it to process, and it usually takes a minute or two. In terms of how long it takes to download the actual data and compile everything, the general message is 15 minutes or less. I don't think I've ever had to wait 15 minutes for a model. This one actually popped up in probably under 2 minutes. So there was a pretty short wait time from the search to the actual model that I was able to access. Now, once you open the initial model from the model builder, you're going to see the area that you had designated by the window, and you'll also see that it is showing you something called the master proposal. The master proposal is the default proposal that comes in and is created for the content that is generated by the model builder. When I zoom into this, I can see that I have terrain data. So as I move around and pan around, I can see that my terrain actually does match what is in the area of my project site. This was the road leading up to that Waimea Canyon. If anybody has been to Kauai, you may have driven up this long, windy road before. This is the downtown area of Waimea Town, and this area here is our project site. So you can see that there is an existing baseball field, an existing soccer field. This is an elementary school, and across the street here, that was the dairy that I had mentioned I knew was there because of my local knowledge of the area. So your information from the model builder contains terrain, aerial imagery, roads, building footprints, and water areas as well. So if we move around enough and we're able to find some water, if there are any designated water areas on the site, you would be able to find those as part of your Infraworks model. So I can see here that I do have water areas that are available and found by designations. And this is all based on USGS database information, OpenStreetMaps, and Bing Maps for aerial imagery. So we start out with the model builder, and this is what we get out of the automated process. So I've done nothing beyond searching for it through model builder, asking Infraworks to create the model for me, and then waiting a few minutes for it to show up inside of my home panel. I did add a watermark here down at the bottom. That's the only reason why that's there. It wouldn't normally be there by default, but it is an option that you can use for company branding and other things of that nature. So you are allowed to create your own watermarks and add that. So everything starts with the model builder. Once we have the model builder, we then start to compile all of our data to create this composite model. And Infraworks is a collaboration tool. Collaborate, when I looked it up, says one of the definitions of collaborate is to work jointly with others. And jointly is the key thing here. You want to work where everyone is together. You're not working on your thing with somebody else. You're working together on something. So in this case, instead of me working in Civil 3D and then bringing in a Revit file, or an architect working in Revit and bringing in a Civil 3D file, I want to see one file where everything is together. Although we're still in the conceptual phase, we do have that opportunity to compile all of these sources into one source or we can see everything and see how everything works together. In the case of Infraworks for collaboration, just looking at the available sources and the available file formats gives you a pretty good reason as to why this might be a pretty good choice to start out with. So just from the drop-down list of data sources, we have 3D model information, AutoCAD drawing information from both 2D AutoCAD and Civil 3D. We have DGN files from MicroStation. We have IMX files, which are exports and imports from Infraworks as well. We have Revit files, City GML files, Industry Foundation class files, Land XML, point clouds, raster files, GIS files from shapefiles and SDF files. You can combine Infraworks models through SQLite databases. You can use Sketchup if you like Sketchup. I have FBX highlighted here as well on the list because FBX files are actually compatible with quite a few different programs in the Autodesk suite as well. And you can use FormIt to create your own pretty nice conceptual models of 3D objects, and that pushes out an FBX as well. So FBX goes into AutoCAD. It can go into a bunch of different things, Civil 3D, Infraworks, and it's just a pretty easy alternative to use on SketchUp. So if you are already a SketchUp subscriber, you know how to use it, and you're already paying for it, then of course you can use it because you're paying for it. But if you're looking for another option that's just there as part of the suite, you can get to FormIt, I believe. If FormIt's not in the suite, then you can contact your account manager to see how to access that as well. I have raster listed here just as raster because when I opened up the data panel, there were 25 different raster file formats that you could choose from. So raster itself supports 25 different file formats along with all of the others that you currently see. And in a lot of cases, you'll probably have your favorites. So as you start to use Infraworks more and as you start to find different data sources and work with different data sources, you'll likely end up with a much smaller list of the ones that you really like to use or the ones that you find you're getting very reliable data from. And those tend to be the ones that you fall back to. So for myself, over the years that I've been using Infraworks and Civil 3D and Revit, along with just the AutoCAD and Civil 3D drawings and Revit files. IMX files are coming in handy these days for exporting information out of Civil 3D and bringing it into Infraworks as is. So you get a lot of detail out of that. You also get a lot of pieces, so you can choose the pieces that you want rather than having to link the entire drawing. FBX files I had mentioned. The DAE files are a really nice option, and they tend to come from the 3D warehouse for me. So there's a 3D warehouse from Trimble. I think it's Google 3D warehouse now, or it used to be Google 3D warehouse, and now it's Trimble. You can search for 3D content there, and you have Collada files that folks are creating and sharing with the world, and those are downloadable and usable and compatible directly with Infraworks. So if you're looking for certain things that you are either not interested in drawing or don't want to spend the time modeling, you can always search for it, see if someone has already taken the time to do something like that and shared it with the world. There's a lot of generic objects that are shared there. A lot of well-known features and structures are also created and shared there. Things like the Space Needle in Seattle, where I live now, that is something that's available for download. Centerlink Field, where the Seahawks play, Safeco Field, where the Mariners play. Those are all different objects that you can find readily available there. So you've got your model builder model. It's created the existing conditions, and now you are ready to create your content or compile your content into a composite model. I'm going back to proposals here because proposals are what we use in Infraworks to help organize things. So the initial conditions that were generated by the model builder came from, or were assigned to, the master proposal that you saw. You can create additional proposals and use those to hide or show elements of your model for different alternative designs, different phases of your design. Anything you create with a proposal active will only display when that proposal is selected. So if I switch to a new proposal and I start to add buildings or start to add features from data sources, if I switch it back to the master proposal, only the model builder content will be there. If I create a second or third proposal after the initial one for phase 2 or phase 3, only the content that I add during those active proposals will be displayed. So you can switch back and forth to either show different options, or you can even switch from one proposal to the next to show progression of construction or progression of phasing that you may have planned for your project as well. Current, you can only have one proposal active at the same time. If there was a way to split screen and see them side by side, that would be awesome. Right now, that is not a feature that is available inside of Infraworks, but there is a request for it on the Autodesk Idea Forum where you can display or control multiple proposals at the same time. So if you like that idea, vote for it, and perhaps we'll see it in the future. So we create those proposals, and then we now have our model. So we're building the information into our model. And also thinking back to our December session, I had asked you to kind of think of BIM as not so much building the information model for a building or a structure, but building the information, building the data into a model of everything. So in this case, we're building information into this model that we have in Infraworks. And for that, we are adding our data sources, and we're also going to be required to configure those data sources. So this is a secondary step that we always need to do, but it's not necessarily brought to your attention a lot of cases in the beginnings of your trials with Infraworks. So anytime you add a data source, you do need to tell Infraworks what it is, especially with 3D model content. If it's just called a 3D model, the program doesn't really know whether it's a tree or a person or a car or a building. So once you add the data, you'll have to then tell it what it is and where it's supposed to be. So the placement and the type are kind of the two primary things that we have here with configuration. There is almost always going to be a tooltip option as well, and tooltips are kind of like the pop-up tooltips that you see in Revit and AutoCAD programs, where you get a little bubble that pops up when you hover over something. So you can create these tooltips for Infraworks objects as well, and that is an option if you would like to apply those in the data source configuration panel. You can do it for everything associated with that data source at one time through the configuration panel, or if you just want to add tooltips to specific items, you can do those through the properties inside of Infraworks by selecting those. And then, of course, in the end, what you're trying to do is share your story. So before we get into sharing your story, let's take a look at how the Infraworks model progresses as we move along. So we're looking back now at Infraworks. This is the result of our model builder search for this area on the west side of the island of Kauai, where we have the athletic complex that was proposed. Thinking back to the newspaper article that had that 2D picture of the proposed elements of the 78-acre development, that would be an excellent tool to use to help us draw out or plan out the actual 3D content of the model. So what I did in this case is I created a proposed proposal. So I have a new proposal here called the proposed Waimea Athletic Complex. And I attached that JPEG image as an overlay onto my model. So this was the first step that I used to start creating my content. I created another proposal by simply clicking Add and then giving it a name. Once that proposal was active, I came over to our Data Sources panel and attached a raster image. So by attaching a raster image, I was able to find that image file and then attach that image file to my model as a source. Now, once that image comes in, because this was just a generic 2D image that I got off of a digital newspaper article, it was not to scale, it was not geolocated, it was not associated with any type of world file that placed it correctly or scaled it correctly. So I kind of had to eyeball this one. So this is the case. If you've got geo-referenced imagery, then it's going to fall into place very, very nicely, like you see here with the ground covering from Bing Maps. In this case, because I just basically copied and saved the image file from a newspaper article, I had to place this and scale it on my own. Fortunately for me, I did find a few common references. So I tried to use a couple of common references. Of course, there's some skew to it based on resolution and based on just the fact that it's a flat image covering a pretty big area. But I tried to line this up as best as I could with some common reference points that I found. One very good way to do this as well is to make the image somewhat transparent. So there's an opacity option that you have inside of the object properties that you can access by selecting the object. So I just clicked on the image there. If you need to work on scaling or rotation or placement, you can use the grips that are available here on the images or on the image to essentially scale or move the object, and then you can use the arrows to rotate the object as well. So you have options of that nature for scaling, for rotation. You can also move the image up and down or left and right by using the box. This is an overall movement, and then each arrow represents movement in a specific work plane. So X, Y, and Z, of course, there. So by scaling and moving and placing the image over the correct spot within the model, I now have something that generally represents the concept in scale. And I use these three buildings here in the background that came in with Model Builder to kind of try and line that up scale-wise with the content from the image. So as you can see there, as I fade the image out, those buildings are relatively where they're supposed to be. And that's how I decided that. For me, that was okay. I have enough general knowledge of the area, plus I'm familiar enough with the site itself that having this in this particular area is pretty good. Now, using that to line up the image, if you wanted to start building content on top of this, by all means, you can start to add more data and add more content and create everything here. What I did was I separated out to another proposal. So each time I develop a newer set of content, I try to organize that as best as I can from proposal to proposal. So this is the full, now developed out complex that I have started to create using the tools inside of Infraworks. And in this case, I still have the image in the background, but I turned the image off. But if I went ahead and I turned that back on, by turning on the image, you can see that I kind of use the image as my baseline for where I started to create the features. And these features are just drawn using the tools inside of Infraworks, as well as by connecting some of the data sources that I have from my external files and formats. So the data sources panel is really your driver behind adding all of this information to Infraworks if it's coming from an outside source. So to get to the data sources panel, we're starting out with the eye, then what looks like a Rubik's Cube or the cube, and data sources. The data sources panel will pop up, and then we have that drop-down list that allows us to access all of the different files and formats that we have. Now, if I'm looking at perhaps a Revit file, if I've got a Revit file that I like, then I would go ahead and choose that Revit file. When you import a Revit file into Infraworks, it does need to process the model. So it's processing it from the native Revit RVT format into a data source that is compatible and more readily accessible by Infraworks. So if you have Navisworks installed on your machine, you can do it locally with Navisworks. Otherwise, when you click on open, it is going to post this to the cloud for processing. So you'll see a feature requires internet connection and an A360 account. When you send this out, it will do a cloud-based process of the model and bring it back into Infraworks as a data source. So this is something that you'll see often when you do Revit imports. And it takes a couple of minutes. But once you have that done, you'll see that it comes in as a Revit file. So it comes in as a 3D model source of data, but it does tell me where that particular object came from. When I initially brought this in, it would say not configured. So at that point, you would be double-clicking on it to configure the object. By configuring the object, you would specify a type, and then the most important thing is, well, is giving it a location. So Revit files are generally not geolocated. So what we'll do is interactive placing. So when I click on interactive placing, it loads a preview of the model, a 3D version of the object, almost like a 3D block in a sense. And it allows me to control that object anywhere on the screen. So as I choose a spot for placement, I can see that this is where I want it to fall. This particular data source, this advanced sample project from our Revit file, came in with the terrain model. So this one actually had a topo surface as part of the Revit file. And when that gets processed, the topo surface comes in with the building, as well as some of the trees and other landscape areas that were all part of that Revit project. So essentially everything that was part of the project and saved with that Revit file gets processed and brought into Infraworks. And you can see here that I've already gone ahead and placed it, or placed one instance of that. Because the terrain that was brought in from Model Builder doesn't quite match up with my topo surface from Revit, there are some issues that I can see that would need to be addressed on the sides. So these are pretty common. If you had just a building that was brought in a non-topo surface containing Revit file, then all you would get is the building itself, and you wouldn't get the ground underneath. So if I have this Revit sample file here, for example, I'll send that one up. It's going to tell me that it's connecting to the data sources and sending it out. When that's done, it's going to come back and give another object that I can use, and it's going to ask me to then, or not ask me, it's going to tell me it's not configured. So then I would need to configure that and place it on the screen just as I did with this one. So when this is done, I'll be able to get to that option for configuration. I'm going to cancel that just so you don't have to wait for it. And then when this comes back, I will show you some other sources that we can use as well. While I am waiting for that to cancel, I'm going to switch over to Civil 3D and show you that this Civil 3D project is also of the same site that we were looking at. And what I have in the background is actually an export out of Infraworks. So Infraworks was able to give me the model builder data for this entire site that I had downloaded. From Infraworks, if I want to take that into Civil 3D, I have an option to export an IMX file, and that IMX file contains all of the 3D object data from this model that I can then bring into Civil 3D. So in Civil 3D, I started a brand new drawing, gave it a coordinate system, and then from here I have the option of using Infraworks to open an Infraworks model or import an IMX file. And that IMX file would then generate what you see here, which are surfaces. I have Civil 3D alignments for all of the road center lines that were brought in from Model Builder. I have 3D objects and entities from the pond outlines. I have 2D entities from the field outlines that I had created, and I can use this to supplement or start my additional design. So let's say I have now this area that I wanted to grade out. I created a little pit here inside of my park that I'm going to put in like a sunken-in amphitheater. So maybe I want like an outdoor stage with some seating area. But in order to do that, I need to dig a hole in the ground. So perhaps in Civil 3D, I'm working on some grading, created some feature lines, offset those, made a big pit in the ground, and I called that a pit inside of Civil 3D. Once that file is saved, I have the option of then going to outputting an IMX file, excuse me. So export an IMX from the Civil 3D drawing, and then that IMX file is now a data source that I can bring into Infraworks. So I started with Infraworks to get that existing ground without a surveyor. One of the big things that I always had issues with on timing was I had a project, I had a deadline, and I had to wait for some survey. Not to say anything bad about surveyors out there, but without survey, there's not a whole lot you can design. So in this case, although it is conceptual and it is GIS grade, so not necessarily survey grade, it gives me a pretty good idea of what's in the area. And in this particular case, because I know my project site is so flat, I'm okay with starting to do some grading from just the general information that I have. So I would be able to export that IMX from Civil 3D, bring that back in to Infraworks using it as a data source. And in this case, I'm just going to go with surfaces because a lot of the other information was actually exported from Infraworks to start out with. So I just want the surfaces. And when I get that data, I have it now terrain, IMX surfaces, and I can see the surfaces that I have. Oh, I didn't redo it after I saved it. Sorry about that. So I have now what would be my proposed surfaces that I have there and available to choose from. These are all the Infraworks surfaces that I had created originally when I did this before. I hadn't saved it before I exported it out. So that pit surface that was there wasn't in the original file that I made. So going along with this, the FBX file that I had mentioned was something that I wanted to show you as well. The FormIt is a pretty awesome tool for those of you who've never used FormIt. It's a conceptual 3D modeling program, very similar from what I understand to SketchUp, where you can just start to create different types of objects. And the interaction between FormIt and the end user is pretty easy to get around. So you can just kind of start to create a whole bunch of stuff and see how it all fits together. And you get to create much more organic type objects, things with domes, things with spheres, than you would generally trying to create it inside of Infraworks, because Infraworks is all linear. So everything that you see in Infraworks, even if it is curved, it's actually linear segments. And you can see here with the running track that I made, actually when I did this, I didn't click on very many spots, so you see the segments there. But if you want more organic looking shapes, things that have curves, things that have glass and texture, these types of things came from the 3D warehouse. This building back here, which I use as my sort of generic outhouse or generic restroom building, this was created inside of FormIt, where it's got this like kind of slightly overhung roof, and it does have a brick siding and some shingles on the top. This was a straight model just generated inside of FormIt and then exported out to a FBX file. So I just do an export FBX for all of the objects in my model. And then if I call it the FBX with domes, save it there. When I'm back in Infraworks, I can just go ahead and add another 3D model. Oh, clicked on Access by mistake. Hang on 1 second. Sorry about that. Go ahead and access my 3D model. It's going to show up as my building. It hasn't been designated yet, so it's a 3D model but not configured, so there's no feature type. So I double click on that to assign it as a building and then interactively place that in the drawing file. Now, if it is way too small, meaning I had set up a different scale inside of FormIt than I have here inside of Infraworks, that perhaps is now a little, maybe it's a super fancy bird bath or water fountain, or if it was actually meant to be a building, I can use the grips here to adjust the height and scale it up to whatever I need. And you can see that the textures, or not the textures, excuse me, the materials that were assigned to the different parts of it inside of FormIt are also now transferred over into Infraworks. And this is much, much nicer in terms of the curves and the domes than anything you would be able to get out of the generic tools that are inside of Infraworks. And because it's a 3D model, you have all of the effects of shading and materials that would apply to rendering as well, and any images that you choose. I did some brick sidewalks here that were just standard roads drawn inside of Infraworks. So I chose a road, but instead of a road with a lane, you can choose a sidewalk type, or in this case, this one, because I wanted it to be rather wide, I just did a stone type of road. You could do sand, or if you can even do just a skinny sidewalk if you wanted to, and just draw something like that. And when it lays it out, you should be able to see that it comes in as just a standard sidewalk as opposed to a full road that we need to see lanes and pavement and striping with. All of the other content that you see around the light posts, the striping, those all came in with the road styles as well. So you have different roads with boulevards that already include landscape striping. The football field, the soccer field, that was all from Collada files from the 3D warehouse. Tennis courts also from the Collada files. The trees are called trees from Infraworks. So there's rows of trees and stands of trees. Stands of trees are groupings, more like an area that's filled by trees. So you can create a stand of trees, and by selecting the density, you can fill that with more trees or less trees. So I can make it very dense, or I can make it less dense by selecting the slider bar there. If I need to get rid of that, I can. Along the center lines of the roads where we have our landscape strips, if I needed to do a planter strip with trees along the way that you see here, that's just a row of trees. By designating the tree type and selecting a linear path, that row of trees will be generated inside of your model. So you're creating all of this content, you're building out what your vision is of your project. What are you trying to communicate in terms of your design to all of the people who need to buy into it? How is this going to impact what they do or what they use this space for now? If you live within a few blocks from here and all you have is the original one baseball field and one big field with a small playground and an outhouse there, is this going to be something that you would use? Is this something you would enjoy seeing? Is it something that you can see your family spending time at? And that's kind of the idea and message you're trying to communicate to everyone that is intending to use this or being part of the customer base that is going to use this. And finally, once this is all set up and you're happy with what you've produced, the next step would be to share your designs, either through storyboards or visualizations. Infraworks itself has an excellent storyboard tool that is very, very easy to use. It starts out with something called a storyboard creator, where you would assign frames either through zoom points or keyframes, and by changing your perspective, moving around the site, changing the rotation, and adding multiple keyframes, you would then create what is, in essence, a virtual fly-through. So this virtual fly-through is now looking at the content of my model, following the path that I designated using these keyframes. And you can see here that I'm flying through the trees, but it is giving me almost a virtual fly-through of the project site, what's there in the proposed development of this athletic complex. And this is a camera path. So it's showing you the camera path based on the content that's displayed in the model at the time that this is being played. That means if I switch back to the master proposal and I played the same storyboard, I would see what's there in the existing conditions from the model builder. So this would show me essentially all flat, unused agricultural land. And then I could do the same fly-through with this proposal active, and you would see the fully developed area with the fields and all of the play structures and roads and everything else that are there. And of course, with that storyboard, you can export it out, save it as a compressed video file, and then you can add it to your presentations as well. So this is the same video file that is now a much smaller compressed version that I've embedded into the PowerPoint that I can play through and voice over if I needed to. So rather than doing that live within the model itself, this can all be done ahead of time and saved and exported out so that it is ready to go for any types of meetings or presentations that you do. And of course, because Infraworks is a live modeling application, if someone sees this fly through and they have a comment, I don't like that play structure, for example, or we want to go with something else, you can open up the model and just swap it out with something else, and you would have a new version to look through right away inside of Infraworks. If your Revit architect gives you a separate file, they send you a new building, all you have to do is add that to a data source, and you'd be able to see that new building and how it falls into the context of the surroundings there as well. So, Autodesk Infraworks, that was our topic of choice for today's civil learning session, and we focused on collaboration and communication, and then finished up with visualization of your designs. And we started out with that 2D picture. We looked at a 3D model of just the site that was also complement to that 2D picture, and then developed it out into a full proposal in the context of its surroundings, using the tools within Infraworks and applying the various data sources that we have access to through the general tools and features within the program itself. Just recently, 2019.1, 2019.2 versions of Infraworks, we also now have an Esri GIS connector that is available to us. So if you are an ArcGIS user, you have ArcGIS accounts with data on them, you can connect directly to your ArcGIS account inside of Infraworks and add that data as well. So the ArcGIS connector is available through data sources, but it's its own icon. So there's a little Esri globe that you'll see there to the right of our data sources drop down, and that will allow you to sign in directly to your Esri account from Infraworks and see all of the data that you have available on your account. And you can add that then as a data source straight to the model. So if you are an Esri user, you have ArcGIS, then you have access to that there as well. It is 11:59, and that brings me to the last slide in my PowerPoint presentation. Happy New Year to those of you who may have joined us after our start time as well. It is January 4th. Happy Friday. It's the first Friday of the new year as well. I hope everyone is having a great time and has a great week.